I'll press record.
Official. She said so.
She said so, exactly. Okay, so I guess we will get started with the first question. So the first question I have for you is, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience with childhood abuse and trauma?
Yeah, so I have both personal experience and professional experience. My personal experience is that at the age of 3, I was playing in my front yard. Granted, this was 1983, so kids played outside all the time back then. Most children over the age of 6 got on their bikes at sun up and didn't come back until all the moms started screaming from the front porch it was time for dinner. And so, and even like that was my way of living too, even after my experience. Anyhow, I was only 3 years old, so I did not do that. But it was my dad's birthday. He took the day off of work and he was painting our house, and we had just finished lunch. My brother and I batted our eyes at him and asked him for a second popsicle. And so he went inside and got another one as soon as my mom left to go back to work. And while he was inside, just in those quick couple of minutes, a car drove up and had the passenger door open and asked if I liked candy. And like any sugar-loving 3-year-old, I eagerly said yes, and we negotiated. And he told me that if I went with him, he'd give me candy. And I jumped in the car as quick as that. And we were gone, moments later. I mean, my dad came outside just moments later and he got in his car and took off after us. But by the time he got to the end of our street, he didn't even know which way I had gone. It was 12:35 in the afternoon. So my abductor took me up to the mountains. He severely abused me physically, sexually, the whole 9 yards. And then he put me in the pit of an outhouse toilet, like in a bathroom. And it was a 15-foot hole. And he put me down there with the intention of, me not living. And I lived for 4 days down there. And bird watchers happened. The outhouse that I was in was like an abandoned old, really icky one. And so 4 days later, this couple were driving by. The wife had to go to the bathroom. Eventually they stopped and heard me crying. And so I was reunited with my family. That was just kind of the beginning of my experience. I have a number of other experiences that, people, you wouldn't want kids to have to go through, and I wouldn't want my kids to have to go through. And it was my life, and not that it was terrible. My parents did the very best that they could do with what they had, and they were trying in every way to give me a normal life. But I'm not sure that you can live a normal life after, being raped and hurt in that way and at a young age. So that's my experience with child abuse. And then, right around 15, I started speaking as a motivational speaker to groups that ranged from like 5 people up to thousands. And every single time I spoke, every single time somebody would come up afterwards or call me or write me or whatever, would find a way to reach out and tell me their experience. And I began to realize that this was something that so many people went through. And for a lot of people, telling me it was their first time telling their experience. And so first I felt honored. Second, I realized I have to do something with this experience. I can't just let my kidnapping just be a story in my book. And so many people do. And I think that is beautiful. And it certainly doesn't define me, but it informs everything that I do. So at 19, I gave a speech at a residential treatment facility for abused kids. And that was that night when I got home, like an hour later, they called and offered me a job. And I was working at Outback and going to school full time. And I was like, okay, why not? I can add something else to my plate. And so that was kind of the beginning of me working with people who had experienced child abuse and trauma. And I say people because it wasn't just the kids that lived there. It was their families, it was their siblings, it was the employees, it was, you know, everybody, so many people in the field I found had their own experience and story. And so I eventually, after taking 6 years off to go into finance because I needed to see if I could be something other than this kidnapped kid. And I was great in finance, but it did not fuel my soul. And so I eventually went back to grad school and got my master's in counseling psychology, and then another degree, like a kind of degree. At that time, it was a 2-year additional certificate in child and adolescent therapy and family and marriage counseling and in infant mental health. And so my focus has been on attachment for the last 21 years. And so I just believe that innately we're all born as pack animals because we're humans and we're first animals. But then secondly, this is the longest answer to a question ever, and I'm sorry. But secondly, I found that every single person had some form of attachment disruption that I had known, or excuse me, when they had a form of attachment disruption, that was their trauma. And especially if it occurred before the age of 8, the lifelong impact of that and the way they interacted in relationships later in life was like so significant. It just was everybody. It was everybody I ever talked to that had an attachment disruption under the age of 8. And so I just learned, and I listened to narrative, I listened to story, and I began helping people. And I spend every single waking moment of every day trying to help people heal their attachment disruption, including me. So I just know a couple of things about it, and I'm always learning and I'm open to learn. And so that's my story. Anyhow.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, not only with me personally now, but you know, with the rest of Starts With Youth and our followers. So I really appreciate that, and I'm so honored, I guess, to be able to hear all of these survivors' stories and be able to put them out into a community for everyone else to benefit from. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Okay, so my next question I have for you is, as the executive director of EndCan, what motivated you to start this foundation?
So having worked in the field for, at the time it had been, I just texted my daughter, she was like, how long have you been in the field of nonprofit? I was like, 21 years. So I started EndCan with Dick Krugman 3.5 years ago. So at the time it would have been like 16 and a half years. And so I've worked in the nonprofit sector for a long time. And I found that so many people in the field came to it because they had bleeding hearts and wanted to help others heal, whether they had been healed themselves or not, which I thought was really powerful. And then B, I found that the systems, the way this field was designed was in an attempt to respond to something, and not as much in an attempt to create something. Now, in no way is that me trying to say that it's bad or wrong. It's just that because the drive to work in this field and to do this comes from our own experiences, I feel like so many things have been in an attempt to cover or plug or tape over this giant hole, which is so many hurt people. And excuse me, and I've seen, fortunately in my lifetime, I've seen other issues like the LGBT movement, like suicide, like breast cancer, like smoking. That when I was young, nobody talked about breast cancer. Nobody talked about being gay, lesbian, transgender, or even questioning it. You certainly, if somebody passed away from suicide, it was like, I mean, I had goosebumps because it was like silence, right? And and smoking, like everybody smoked. My doctor smoked, like while I was in the room with him. I mean, it just was what people did. And then I've watched in my 40 years of life, I've watched each one of those things, and there's so many others, right? But I've watched each one of those things improve, not because there was a program that did amazing things, that helped for sure, but because people started talking about it. And people who have lived experience all of a sudden started saying, hey, wait a hot minute. I'm not alone. And look at how amazing I am, even though I was a smoker, even though I'm a breast cancer survivor, even though I identify as LGBT or Q, even though, right? Just that even though made me think, wow, okay, nobody talks about their child abuse experience. And a lot of that is because there's shame and there's fear of hurting our family members. There's fear of parents feeling like we all failed when, like ultimately it's always our parents' fault. Everything is. So every parent feels like they fail. And so I started EndCan because I wanted to do for this field and for this topic what I've seen so many others do for other topics that were once taboo.
That's amazing. I honestly, I couldn't agree more. And that's very much our focus at Starts With Youth, is creating a community that no longer shies away from these types of conversations.
Yeah.
So similar, I guess, foundations of why we want to do this for bettering our society.
Amazing.
So my next question is, what are some of the resources that EndCan offers, and what do you hope people will gain from using these resources?
Yeah, so our biggest resource that isn't really even, it's a resource and it's an ask, it's a plea, and that is a community of survivors. There's places, we have an anonymous community, we have an open forum community, and we have an action-oriented community that has a few different options in it. The anonymous community is a place where people can go to talk about their experience, to, I don't know, seek support, to share, to whatever, to be supportive, whatever, all of that. The open forum community is a place for people to go and share their stories and just kind of own their words, own their own voice, because that's something that happens so frequently with child abuse and neglect, is that we're robbed of our own vocal cords, right? And then the action-oriented resources is designed. We have a Young Champions Council. So it's a national group of people under the age of 36 who volunteer, kind of like it's just like a board, but it's for young professionals, young adults, survivors or not, it doesn't matter. There's no requirement, but they come together and we've just begun it at the end of 2020, and really come together and focus on how to take action together. And how do we spread this word? How do we join with organizations like yours, among so many others, to truly do this? And so that is an exciting group. They are pumped up and I love it. And we're eager for participants for that. And then another action-oriented group is our volunteers. And this year, so we've only been open for 3.5 years. The first 1.5 years was trying to figure out how to set up a nonprofit, because it was only me and Dick who like will not own that he operationalizes anything. He just has ideas, which is amazing. And then the next 7, 8 months was like putting all of that in place, building a board. And then 2020 was like, okay, now that nobody can go anywhere and do anything, how do we do this? What do we do? And so 2020 was our strategic planning year, which was really cool. And so 2021 is our action taking year. And this year we're doing the first ever march. It's a national march happening in cities all over the country where we're calling upon people who connect to this, not victims, not just survivors, not just family members, but like supporters, believers, everybody to come together and say, okay, let's do this. You know, we don't need to go after all the perpetrators out there. We just need to support all the survivors. And eventually the perpetrators will be supported too because they were first survivors. And that's the goal. So that's the action. And so it's a resource and a plea blended into one.
I love that. I'm really excited to hear more about this march and when that will take place. I don't know if you guys have a date set in place yet, but
yeah, I'm happy to share. You know, we don't have a specific date because right now we have 6 cities we're doing it in, and we're permitting and COVID are the thing at the moment. So we have to identify some cities like LA aren't giving out any permits at all right now. And we really want to make sure we're doing them all right around the same time. And they're going to be September, October of 2021. And so at the moment we're waiting for vaccines and, you know, all those things like the world issues to come into place so that people are a little more safe and we can get the permits necessary to pair up all the dates so that it can all happen. But it will.
That's so exciting.
It really is. I have goosebumps.
I'm so excited for you guys. Okay, the next one I have is you travel nationally as a motivational speaker talking about your journey to becoming a transcender. What do you mean by this and what was your journey like?
Yeah, you know, so there is this remarkable social worker. Her name is Diane Baird. She is the only reason I finished my graduate school program. Like I wanted to quit so badly, so many different days because my internship was challenging. And it was just hard. Life was hard, right? And Diane called me one day and she said, you know, it was like 7:30 in the morning. I'm just driving into work and I'm thinking about you. And I truly believe that there's first victims, and then there's survivors, and then there's thrivers, and then there's transcenders. And you are a transcender. And I was like, I have to Google that word. Like I didn't really know what she meant. So, but I was like, thank you. Oh my gosh, whatever, thank you. And so I Googled it, right? Because that's what you do. And what I found, I'm paraphrasing, please Google, don't be mad at me for ruining this. But so I'm paraphrasing that what I understood of the word transcender is somebody who's been through a challenge and has not only overcome it, but has turned around and paid it forward. And I just felt so humbled and proud and egocentric in that moment. I was like, yeah, I was so happy. And I shared that in a speech once. And this lady in the audience made me a cape, like made me a superhero cape with a capital T on it. And I just like, it really stuck with me. And I self-own it now because that's why I do what I do. And it's exhausting. And some days I'm broken and yet I keep getting up. And so that is Diane Baird. It's all her. And I just thought it was really cool. So
that is honestly, when I read that, I was like, I did the same thing. I Googled it. I was like, a transcender? Like, I know the word transcend, but like, I've never heard transcender, but right. I love that. I'm going to share that with my team. And like, I hope we can share that with other people so that they're able to identify as that, because it's something so amazing to feel about yourself.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that. And that's a really valid piece of information. Like, honestly, I want to identify as a transgender. That's
Right.
amazing.
You totally are. The fact that you're interviewing and like doing this, and I mean, you're doing it. It's your, I mean, that's what it is, right?
Yes,
So it's
exactly.
really
Paying it
cool.
forward. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, the next one I have, or the next couple of questions, I sort of got from your webpage and the stats that you guys share. So I sort of tailored the questions towards that.
Sure.
So I have you explain that one of the biggest barriers to combat child abuse and neglect is the social stigma that surrounds it. What do you think are some ways that we can reduce this stigma?
Yeah. I think that one thing that I found in my career and just like my experience in the world, and this truly is just my opinion, but when something bad happens, it's so easy for us to all want to focus on who do we blame and like why did this happen? And that I do that. We all, I mean, like my first response is, how did this happen? You know? But my second response, hopefully, is like, what do we need to do so this doesn't happen again? And it pulls me out of the anger and puts me into a place of solution. And for so many people, that's not their second response. It's not even their 15th. And I get it. Like I've been there. And where that stems from is in grad school, I had to take a diversity class. And my teacher said the assignment was you have to work with people that you wouldn't otherwise work with. And the only people on that list at the time were sex offenders. And I was like, all right, here I come. And I marched to a sex offender place. And he was like, whoa, you don't have like, Lori, you're doing it to the extreme. But I marched to the sex offender place and I volunteered and I did like 100 hours where I was only supposed to do 20. But all of a sudden I realized that those people, the offenders that I was among were people, and almost all of them were survivors. And what they did was inexcusable. And their choice versus mine to do harm instead of good was hurt me. It hurt my heart. And so I found so often that what people want to do when we talk about child abuse is they want to, you know, litigate. They want to sue the bad guy. They want to out their family. They want to, you know, go that route. And I haven't found that to be as helpful or as healing as finding our own voices and as living through compassion and living by way of modeling how I want everybody around me to be. And I know that hurt people hurt others. So instead of hurting others, I'm going to love them, because sometimes I have this quote right here that Don Brass said to me 2 weeks ago in a podcast recording. He said, the difference between the offender and the survivor is that someone believed in them. And I find that to be what drives, I don't even remember your question now, and I'm sorry. But for me, that is what drives why I do this work and why it is so taboo, and why we have to talk about it, because we need people to come together and show that it's possible to get out of this, and that it's possible to move on with our lives and have it be a part of our life, like not ignore it, not forget about it, not talk about it all day, every day, not be angry and not repeat it, but instead to like have it be a part of my identity just as much as being a woman, just as much as being a mother. I'm okay with that. I'm proud of my experience. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I love what I've done with it, and I'm okay with that. So I think I answered your question. I'm sorry.
No, you definitely did, and you added your own little twist to it, and I love that.
Okay.
Okay, The next one I have for you is one goal of EndCan is to break the silence of childhood abuse and neglect. What do you think we need to do as a society to change this narrative?
Yeah, I would say, just as I've been saying, is really like we have to come together and we have to hold the space and create a community for and with and because of one another. And I do believe that, I know that 99.9% of people who are offenders once were offended upon. But I also know, and we don't have a statistic, sadly, but I also know that most people who were abused do not grow up to abuse. What we don't know is what did one group get that the other didn't? And how do we do that more? Like, how do we, if it's giving them 50 cents in kindergarten, I got 50 cents. I've actually got a lot of 50 cents. I'll make that happen. But what I want to do is help people see that we don't have to offend because we learned that. We don't have to repeat the cycles and the things that we've learned. And we certainly, even if we do yell at our kids or hit our kids or harm our kids or neglect them, we don't have to keep doing it. And so, like, there's always a time to stop. Always. There's always a time to say, I'm sorry, and to change. And so what we need to do is to come together and just talk and stop blaming and stop shaming and stop hiding and stop being angry and just talk. And I think that if we do that, we're going to do some pretty cool things for this topic, but ideally make it go away. Wouldn't that be so cool?
It would honestly be amazing.
Yeah.
Too. I was saying to my roommate the other day, I live with many of my team members. I live with 3 of my team members.
Nice. That's a community.
That honestly, we're all friends, and that's how this started. We're all like very, very good friends. So that's my team, which is amazing. But I was saying that what if we were to look at childhood abuse from a preventative perspective? And that why can't we stop children from being hurt in the first place? Not looking at it as an aftermath of trauma when it's already happened. So preventing it from happening in the first place. So
yeah, and I hear people say that, and I love it, and I want us to be there. And so then I ask prevention organizations, because there's so many cool ones. I say, where do you intervene? And, at what age do you intervene? And some say, in the ECE, early childhood education. Some say with parents who are just like first-time parents. Some say at risk. Some say, whatever. And my answer, I ask it because I'm curious. And my answer is you intervene in the whole circle, because we have to start with the us. And I don't want to loop you in, but I'm saying us, meaning survivors. We have to start with the us, because the us is also the them. And and so it has to be everything. It has to be both and I think that's the overwhelming part, right? Is that it's so big. Like, where do we even begin? We just begin with us, and then we go to the thems, and then all of a sudden it's all of us, like us and them. That's everybody. Check, like, so that's how I look at it. And yeah, we got a lot to do, but I think it's going to be easier than we think.
I hope so. My last question I have for you is, what do you believe are some ways that people can get involved in their communities to try and help end childhood abuse and neglect? I guess you kind of just answered that, but.
Yeah, I think that anything we can to get involved. So if that means finding your local children's advocacy centers or family resource centers or Prevent Child Abuse America groups, or showing up to a march, or starting a group, moving in with a bunch of people that you love and starting a organization where we're all talking about hard things, whatever it is, just do it. Just do it. That's it. Every time you see a child, be a light in their day. Every single time you see a kid, be a light for them. That's all we need. That's it. We just need somebody to see us when we're not seen as kids and we're being abused. So see them.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna actually pause the recording. I may as well. I'll leave it keep going.